My name is Earl McKenna. Been fishing these waters from the cold shores of Maine down to the humid Keys for more of my life than not. My hands are a road map of old hook scars and rope burns, and my face is tanned to the color of old leather from 1,000 sunrises. They say the ocean keeps its secret, and I suppose after 50 years it shared a few of them with some are lessons in patience, some are whispers of danger, and some are stories you wouldn't believe unless you were there to see the line scream off the reel yourself. I'm just here to tell 'em as I remember 'em. Friends, if you feel a connection with these stories from the sea, consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is the wind in our sail. The cold that year had settled deep into my bones, a damp, persistent ache that the northern winds seemed to chew on. So I did what any sensible old man with a boat and too much time on his hands would do. I pointed my truck south and didn't stop until the air tasted of salt and warm mud. Found myself a little spot on the Texas coast, a place where the pelicans are bigger and lazier than any I'd ever seen, and the local fishermen talk in slow, easy drawl that can make even a hurricane warning sound like a friendly suggestion. My nephew Micah lived down there. Good kid, but his idea of a wild time was programming computers. He'd look at my gnarled hands and my old boat, the Sea Heather, and I could see him trying to solve me like one of his puzzles. He'd invited me down for Thanksgiving, promising a break from the ice and a reunion with family I hadn't seen in a decade. The family part was nice, but the real draw was the different water, the different fish, the different stories. And that's where I first heard about the armored one. It wasn't in some tourist pamphlet. You hear the real stories in the bait shops that smell of shrimp and gasoline, or down on the docks at dusk when the old-timers cleaning their catch. The talk was always the same. Out past the barrier island, in a deep shipping channel carved out decades ago, stood the rusted skeleton of an old oil platform, the Iron Orchid, they called it, and somewhere in the dark green depths beneath it lived something ancient, something that had snapped 100-pound test lines like sewing thread, straightened steel hooks the size of a man's hand. They didn't call it a fish. They called it a legend. They said it had scales like overlapping plates of dull bronze, that it moved not with the panic of a hooked fish, but with the slow, deliberate power of the tide itself. It didn't bite. It took, and nothing they threw at it, mullet, bonita, even small sharks, was enough to tempt it. "It's a ghost story, Uncle Earl," Micah told me as we sat on his porch watching the heat lightning flash over the Gulf. "Something the old guys tell to spook the charter boat captain." I just nodded and sipped my coffee. I've been a fisherman long enough to know that every ghost story has a bit of truth tangled in its net. The ocean is the last great wilderness on this earth, and it's got things living in its dark corners that would make a man's imagination look tame. The Thanksgiving that followed was a disaster in the culinary sense. Micah's wife, a sweet girl named Florence, had tried her best. But that turkey, it was a crime against poultry, dry as a sand dune and tough as a boot heel. After everyone had politely picked at it and moved on to the pie, there it sat on the platter, a 20-pound monument to disappointment. Florence was about to throw it in the trash, looking heartbroken. "Hold on there now," I said, a slow-burning idea flickering to life in the back of my mind. It was a foolish idea, a ridiculous, nonsensical, maybe even crazy idea, and that's how I knew it was a good one. "Don't you throw that out. I've got a use for it." Micah looked at me, then at the turkey, then back at me. "Uncle Earl, what are you going to do with a 20-pound overcooked turkey?" I gave him a slow grin. "I'm going fishing." The look on his face was worth the price of the plane ticket down. He thought I'd finally lost my marbles. The sun had cooked my brain. Maybe he was right, but the thought had taken root. The locals said no conventional bait worked. They said the creature was too big, too smart, too ancient tricks. Well, I figured there was nothing conventional about a whole Thanksgiving turkey. If you want to catch a legend, you can't use the same bait you use for flounder. The next 2 days were spent in preparation. I took the sea heather out for a short run just to feel her pulse in these new waters. I checked my gear, not the light tackle for trout or bass, but the heavy artillery, my thickest rod, a beast of fiberglass and graphite that felt more like a pole vault, a fishing rod. The reel was a big old pinned senator, the kind they use for marlin, and I spooled it with fresh 800-pound braided line. It was overkill for anything I could imagine, but this wasn't about imagination. This was about the armored one. The real engineering challenge was the turkey. How do you turn a Thanksgiving dinner into bait? I spent an afternoon in Micah's garage, the smell of sawdust mixing with the faint, lingering scent of sage thyme. I bought the biggest treble hooks, fine, monstrous things that looked like grappling hooks for castle wall. Using a drill, I threaded heavy-gauge steel leader wire through the bird's carcass, anchoring 2 of those hooks near the breast and a third, even larger one, near the tail. It was a grotesque sort of surgery. When I was done, the turkey looked like some kind of bizarre prehistoric weapon. Micah watched me from the doorway, shaking his head. "You're really going to do this?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Yep," I replied, testing the strength of the wire. "Figure he's probably tired of fish. Time for a little poultry." "And you're going out to the old rig? Alone?" "That's where they say he lives, Uncle Earl. The currents out there are wicked. The rig itself is falling apart. It's dangerous." "Son," I said, looking up from my work, my hands slick with turkey grease, "everything worthwhile in this life has a little danger attached to it. It's what makes you feel alive." He didn't argue after that. He just helped me load the gear onto the sea heather that evening, his silence heavier than any lecture. I left well before dawn the next day. The world was still painted in shades of charcoal and deep blue. A thin sliver of a moon hung in the sky. The air was thick with smell of load. As I navigated the boat through the channel markers, the lights of the town shrinking behind me, a profound sense of solitude settled over me. It was just me, my foolish plan, and the dark, sleeping water. After an hour, I saw it, a black lattice of rusted steel against the faintly glowing horizon, the iron orchid. It rose from the sea like the ribcage of some colossal, long-dead beast. The place had an aura about it, a heavy silence that the crying of the gulls couldn't seem to break. It felt ancient the first time, tremor of doubt. What in God's name was I doing out here, with a turkey on a hook, chasing a ghost story? But I hadn't come this far to turn back. I cut the engine a good distance away and let the current carry me closer. The only sound, the gentle lapping of water against the hull. I baited the hook. It was an absurd 2-man job for a 1-man crew. Heaving that 20-pound bird over the side felt ridiculous. It hit the water with a loud, undignified splash and began to sink slowly, spiraling down into the... I let out the line, my thumb on the spool, feeling it descend into the depths. 50 feet, 100, 200. The channel was deep here, a man-made canyon. At nearly 300 feet, the line went slack. The turkey settled on the bottom. I reeled in the slack, locked the reel, and placed the heavy rod in its holder. And then I waited. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in strokes of orange-pink. The rust of the old rig glowed like fire. The world was waking up, but down below in the dark, something was still sleeping. Or so I hoped. There's a unique kind of stillness that settles over deep water at dawn. It's not just quiet, it's heavy. The world holds its breath, waiting for the sun. I poured myself a cup of coffee, dented thermos, the steam rising like a ghost, the cool air. I watched a pair of gulls circle the rusted derrick of the iron orchid, their cries echoing in the silence. Hours passed. The sun climbed the sky, a hot white coin that burned off the morning mist and started to beat down on the deck. I rechecked the drag on the reel for the 10th time. I adjusted my hat. I ate a dry sandwich that tasted of nothing. This is the part of fishing they don't show you in the magazines. The long, empty hours where the biggest battle is with your own impatience. I started to feel the fool. Here I was, a man in his 70s, baking in the Texas sun with a Thanksgiving turkey for bait, chasing a fisher story. Micah was probably right. I could picture him in his air-conditioned office, shaking his head. I was about to reel in the line, chalk it up as a good story for the boys back at the dock, when it happened. It wasn't a strike. A strike is a violent, desperate thing, a jolt, a slam, a frantic tug. This was different. The rod tip, thick as my thumb, dipped. It didn't bounce or jerk. It simply bowed, slow, deliberate, and impossibly heavy bend, as if the line had been snagged not on a rock, but on the continent itself. I put my hand on the rod, and I could feel it through the cork handle, a living weight, a pressure that felt less like a fish and more like the slow, inexorable pull of a glacier. For a moment, I did nothing. I just watched the rod bend deeper and deeper until the tip was nearly touching the water's surface. Then, the drag on the big pin senator, which I had set so tight I could barely turn it by hand, began to yield. It wasn't the high-pitched scream of a marlin running. It was a low, groaning complaint, a deep, guttural sound of tormented metal as the spool began to turn, one agonizing click at a time. Click, click, click. My heart, which had been beating a slow, steady rhythm, started hammering against my ribs. This was it. This was no drum, no grouper, no shark. This was something else. I grabbed the rod from its holder, the weight of it nearly pulling me off balance. I braced my feet against the transom and leaned back, putting all my weight into it. It was like trying to stop a slow-moving truck with a rope. The creature on the other end of the line didn't seem to notice. It just continued its slow, powerful journey along the bottom of the channel, taking line with a terrifying steadiness. The sheer, brute force was unlike anything I had ever felt. I've had bluefin tuna that could strip a reel in a minute, sharks that would fight with frantic, thrashing rage. This was different. There was no panic in it, no frenzy. It was calm, ancient power. I realized it wasn't running from me. It was simply going where it wanted to go, and I, my boat, and my half-ton of gear were just a minor inconvenience it was towing along, and it was towing me straight for the iron orchid. A cold shot of adrenaline cut through my awe. If that line touched one of those rusted, barnacle-encrusted pilings, it would be shredded in an instant. I scrambled for the engine key, never letting go of the rod. The engine coughed to life with a roar. I jammed it into gear, turning the wheel hard to port, trying to pull the sea heather away from the rig. The boat groaned in protest, caught in a tug of war between its own engine and the monster in the deep. For a terrifying minute, we were at a standstill, the stern of the boat being pulled sideways toward a massive steel leg that was fuzzy with a century's worth of rust and razor-sharp shells. "Oh, no, you don't," I grunted, sweat stinging my eye. "Not today." I gave the engine more throttle, the prop churning the green water to foam. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, I managed to pull the boat's nose around. The angle of the line shifted. I had turned it, but only just. The creature seemed to change tactics. It stopped its slow march and simply held its ground, a dead weight 300 feet below. Now, the real work began. The next few hours became a blur of strain and sweat. It was a battle of pure attrition. I would gain a few feet of line, my arms and back screaming in protest, the muscles in my shoulders burning like hot coals. I'd pump the rod, leaning back with all my might, then reeling down frantically to reclaim the slack. I thought I was in progress. The creature would give a slow, effortless shake of its head, and the line would peel off the reel again, undoing 10 minutes of back-breaking intense. The sun crossed its peak and began its slow descent toward. My water was gone. My hands were raw, rubbed red and blistered by the reel handle. Every muscle in my body felt like it had been stretched to its breaking point and then tied in knots. The fight had taken on a rhythm. My effort against its resistance, a stalemate played out over the deep channel. It used the rig like a seasoned fighter uses the ropes of a ring. It would circle a piling, forcing me to maneuver the boat frantically to keep the line clear. It would dive deep, using the current to add even more pressure. It was intelligent, deliberate. I began to feel a strange, profound respect for my unseen opponent. This was no dumb beast. It was a king in its own domain, and I was the fool who had knocked on the castle door with a turkey. As the sun finally touched the horizon, painting the clouds in fiery shades of orange and purple, a deep exhaustion set in, the kind that settles right into your marrow. I was tired, not just in body, but in spirit. The fight had gone on for the better part of a day. Darkness began to creep in from the east. The lights on the mainland began to twinkle to life, a distant world I was no longer part of. Out here, there was only the groaning of the line, the throb of the engine, the ache in my body, and the immense unseen weight in the abyss. It was in that growing darkness, with the rig becoming a black silhouette against the fading light, that I realized the true nature of the battle. The creature wasn't tiring. I was. It had all the time in the world. It had been here long before I was born and would be here long after I was gone. Wasn't fighting a fish anymore. I was tethered to a piece of history, to a force of nature that had no concept of giving up, and it was patiently, methodically pulling me down into its dark and silent world. The last of the daylight bled from the sky, leaving behind a deep stardust. The iron orc is no longer a structure, but a hole in the heavens, a place the stars weren't. My world had shrunk to circle of light, cast by the single lamp on the sea has console. The water beyond that was black as ink. The fight had changed. In the daylight, battle. Now, in the dark, it felt like wrestling with the night itself. My body had gone past pain into a state of numb, trembling. My arms, back, and legs were a single, unified ache. My hands were cramping so badly I had to pry my fingers off the reel handle one by one. I was running on something other than muscle now, some stubborn, deep-seated pride that old fishermen have, the kind that makes you hold on long after common sense has packed its bags and gone home. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, that my body would simply give out, I felt a change. The immense downward pressure lessened. The slow, groaning pull from the reel stopped. For the first time in nearly 8 hours, I was able to turn the handle without the drag. Was it over? Had the hook pulled free? A wave of disappointment, surprisingly sharp, washed over me. But no. The line was still taut, the rod still bent in a deep arc. The weight was still there, but it was different. It was coming up. Whether the creature had finally begun to tire or had simply decided to see what nuisance was tethered to its jaw, I'll never know. But it was rising from the deep, slowly. I found a new reserve of strength I didn't know I had. I put my head down and cranked, my entire body working in a desperate mechanical rhythm. Pump the rod up, reel down fast, pump, reel, pump, reel. The spool, which had seemed so empty a few hours ago, began to fill with wet, tightly packed line. Foot by foot, I brought it up from the crushing darkness. I could feel every slow tail beat through the line, a deep, rhythmic thud that was less like fish swimming and more like great timber being hoisted depth. My senses strained my eye, peering into the black water just beyond. The first thing I saw was a swirl, a disturbance on the surface about 20 feet from the boat. It wasn't a splash, but a slow, oily bulge in the water, as if something immense was displacing it from below. Then the leader wire, my grotesque turkey rig, emerged from the depths, glinting in the lamplight. And then it surfaced. The breath caught in my throat. My mind, weary as it was, struggled to comprehend what my eye was seeing. It rose silently, breaking the surface. It wasn't a fish. It was a living relic, an alligator gar, but of a size that belonged in a museum of prehistoric life. It was easily twice as long as I am tall and thicker around the middle than an old oak barrel. Its head was a broad, flat nightmare of a thing, a shovel-shaped snout filled with rows of needle-like teeth. But it was the scales that held me mesmerized. They weren't the shimmering silver scales of a normal fish. They were huge, interlocking plates of bone, diamond-shaped and the color of tarnished pewter, each one as big as my palm. The armored one, the name was perfect. It looked less like a creature of flesh and blood and more like something sculpted from ancient stone and river mud. My light played across its massive body. The turkey, or what was left of it, was lodged firmly in the corner of its jaw, the huge treble hook buried deep. And its eye was the size of a silver dollar, jet black, and utterly devoid of fear or panic. It simply watched. There was no struggle, no thrashing. It lay on the surface, moving only with the gentle swell of the sea, its gills flaring slowly, deliberately. It was as if it had come up simply to look its adversary in the face. In that moment, staring at that primeval creature, all fight went out of the pride, the desire to conquer, the need to win. It all just evaporated and blew away on the night wind. What was I going to do? Drag this magnificent beast, this king of the deep, back to a dock to be weighed and photographed, to have its picture in some local newspaper? It felt wrong. It felt like a desecration. This creature was older than my boat, older than the oil rig, maybe even older than the stories they told him. It didn't belong on my line. It belonged right here, in the dark water where it had reigned for a lifetime. We floated there for a long minute, tethered together in the quiet dark. The old man and the old monster. It was a moment of strange, silent communication. I saw in its unblinking eye not a prize to be won, but a piece of the wild, untamable soul of the ocean, and I knew what to do. With trembling hands, I propped the rod against the gunwale and reached for the long-handled gaff. I fumbled in my toolbox for a pair of wire cutters. My muscles screamed in protest with every movement. Leaning as far over the side of the boat as I dared, I stretched the gaff out. The gar didn't move. It watched me with that same unnerving calm. I hooked the gaff onto the thick steel leader wire just above its jaw. I took a deep breath, the salty air filling my lungs, and with a grunt of effort, I squeezed the handles of the wire cutter. There was a loud snap. The line went slack. The heavy bend in the rod straightened. Sigh. For a second, the creature didn't move. Then, with a slow, powerful sweep of its broad tail, it turned. It didn't dive frantically. It simply sank, melting back into the black water from which it came. The oily swirl on the surface was the only sign it had ever been there, and then it was gone. I stood there for a long time, my arms shaking, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. I was alone again, in the circle of light, with the quiet lapping of the waves against the hull. I reeled in the loose line, the severed end of the leader wire clinking against the rod tip. I was exhausted, aching, empty-handed. I hadn't won, but somehow I didn't feel like I'd lost either. The journey back to shore was slow. I didn't push the engine. I just let the sea cruise gently over the dark water, the lights of the town growing brighter ahead. When I finally tied up at the deserted dock, the first hint of gray was touching the eastern sky. My nephew Micah was there waiting for me, a worried look on his face. He rushed over as I stumbled onto the dock, my legs feeling like jelly. "Uncle Earl, I was about to call the Coast Guard. Are you okay? What happened?" He looked past me, into the empty boat. "Where's the fish?" I just looked at him, slow, tired smile spreading across me. I was covered in sweat and grime. My hands were bleeding, and I felt 100 years old, but I also felt more alive than I had in years. "Some fish," I said, my voice raspy. "You don't catch. You just meet. The greatest trophies are not the ones we hang on a wall, the stories we carry in. True mastery isn't about conquering nature, but about knowing when to show it respect and finding your own place within its immense power. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If my stories bring a little bit of the sea to you, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and sharing it with a friend. Your support helps keep these old tales alive.